There we go. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Weekly Pop Movie Podcast. Appreciate you guys coming around. It's been a little while. I think it's been like 2 weeks since my last upload. So I'm excited to be talking to you guys again a little bit about movies. And I'm excited to introduce you all to our very special guest, Caleb of Caleb Says Stuff, joining us again. How's it going, Caleb?
Hey, pretty good, man. How are you doing?
Doing good. Glad to have you back on.
Yeah, man. Always good to be back on.
What did we talk about last time? I was trying to remember earlier.
Oh, about which aliens we sleep with.
Yeah, see, we only have really hard-hitting conversations when Caleb comes on. It's important that we keep it of the highest integrity, and we are going to continue on that tradition.
We did have a very in-depth Me Too conversation in Z's, though. So we actually did tackle. Granted, no one listened to that part. They probably got turned off by us talking about who we're going to sleep with.
That's fantastic. And we did those both in the same show, I'd imagine.
Yeah, it was like an hour-long show.
Yeah, that's a nice little combination of two different, very disparate topics. But so we're going to talk about nostalgia and nostalgia. This is something that it's not a new conversation, and it's not some new phenomenon that just recently started happening. But we are living in the age of nostalgia. It applies to so many different elements of our lives. And just for a little bit of context, the word nostalgia comes from two words in Greek. I think one of them means homecoming and the other means sadness. So it's this bittersweet feeling that we get when we associate things that we see with our pasts. And if you look around the multiplexes, that's kind of what's going on. You know, they're trying to recapture a lot of the things that we're nostalgic for from our youths and repackage them, repurpose them, and sell them like that Malcolm speech on Jurassic Park. But Caleb, man, when you hear the word nostalgia, what does it conjure to mind?
I'd say sadness more than anything.
Really?
No, I have my issues with nostalgia, and I know we'll get into that. So to me, when I think of nostalgia, it's just something like you said, bittersweet, something that you think of a simpler time, that you kind of look at it through rose-colored glasses, and you're maybe not as I hate the word objective used when talking about movies, but you're not as realistic, I guess, because you have it tied to so many emotions.
Yeah, I mean, that's 100% right. And actually, they say it's easier to hold on to happy emotions. So even if we remember this particular time, this particular event, we're probably omitting the parts about it that suck. So back to what you said about rose-colored glasses, it definitely is that. And it's funny that you say sadness, because I think what the first thing that comes to mind when I think of nostalgia is something else that you touched on, but like simpler times, just something that takes you back instantly to your youth. You know, it can be a song is always going to be a really good trigger for it. Or maybe it's an odor or a scent that you catch. That'll always capture a memory and bring you back to a place. But do you think that we're in the well, let's go ahead and just talk about it, man. Do you think that it's good or bad that Hollywood is using this as a tactic?
I think it can be good if you have something to add to a story. By all means, do it. Like I'm a huge Planet of the Apes fan, and when they brought back the new Planet of the Apes, great. I felt the difference was it wasn't just playing to nostalgia. They actually were concerned about making a good movie. I feel we're in this now where everything is just like the same but different. They're like, oh, here's the new stormtroopers. See, they're the same, but just a little bit different. And it's kind of, have you seen South Park and Wild, the member berries? Have you seen that thing?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that is a perfect thing of it, where it's like, hey, you guys remember that? And I get a little sick of the fan servicey where it's like turn, wink, and nod at the camera. It's like, hey, you saw that movie. And I'm like, yeah, I did see the movie. That's why I'm sitting here again. You know, you don't need to play. Just make a good movie.
Yeah, absolutely. And go ahead.
Oh, no, I just feel like sometimes it holds us from exploring characters in a more interesting light because people have these rose-colored glasses. I can, when we get into it, talk about one of my favorite franchises that I love the movie. I watch it every year, but it's not a good movie, and people say it is, and that's the original Ninja Turtles. I love that movie.
Oh, yeah. It's no shame in that.
Not a good movie. You know?
So it's funny you say everything that we get presented is a little bit just it's the same and then a little bit different. And Planet of the Apes is the first one that, you know, you actually mentioned by name as far as a movie goes. And that is a really good example of a movie that borrows from its predecessors. The premise is very similar. It tells a story that has a very allegorical nature to it, where the first one had its own very specific themes. I think the new one kind of explores different themes. And in that way, it's taking brand recognition without being totally beholden to recapturing images. And I think that's kind of what you're talking about. And Star Wars is incredibly guilty of it, where they will just throw in that thing that, you know, and the audience is no doubt going to explode into cheers and everything because they recognize it. And I think that this kind of thinking even bleeds over into music and things like that. Like when you hear a song one time, you kind of like it. You hear it 5 more times, and the familiarity starts to make you like it more and kind of associate it with yourself. And I think that's kind of what is happening with the movies now, is that they're kind of just playing the greatest hits over and over again. And because they're familiar and because we, you know, kind of know the journey, that there's comfort in that, and that we feel safe in that.
Yeah, I would say absolutely that's what they're tapping into, is just the comfort. It's comfort food. And I don't know, I sometimes like that, but I also feel like I go to movies for a different thing. I want to get something out of it. I like weird movies, I like experimental movies. I like something new. And don't get me wrong, everything's been done to the nth degree at this point. But I do think there's some concepts we could explore and not just so grab it. And I mainly get mad of nostalgia more on the fan base end than I actually do on the Hollywood
Sure,
end.
yeah.
Like that bugs. So we'll take Star Wars. Episode 1, I will agree, is not a good movie. But Jar Jar Binks is really no more worse than Ewoks, except for you saw Ewoks when you were kids, so you have that simpler time tied to them, the space teddy bears. And that's why you meet a kid who's 15 years old. He doesn't care about Jar Jar Binks. You know, he grew up with him. He doesn't care. It's just a nostalgia play. And so I feel like sometimes I get in sometimes trouble for saying Star Wars are family films. That's not me actually like knocking them. They're a little more lighthearted family films. And people think that I'm being an ass about it. And I'm like, no, they're pulp sci-fi movies. They're supposed to be fun for the whole family. And I feel like because in my memory of Star Wars is much darker than actual Star Wars is, because I saw it when I was a kid. They were serious, dark, gritty, but they're not actually those films.
Yeah, I think that's really valid, man. And in a way, I think that critics and fans alike are very guilty of that. Everybody wants to act objectively like the Star Wars trilogy, the beloved Star Wars trilogy, is this flawless masterwork of filmmaking. And it's like, dude, you saw it when you were 5 years old. What did you know about movies at the time? And I'm not taking away from it. Again, I was kind of born into that, you know? So
Me too. I watched Star Wars my entire life, so I get it, you know? Like, I love it, but I get what you're saying.
Yeah, and I think that's something that's often I think that's also the very problem that a lot of people had with Return of the Jedi. And again, not Return of the Jedi, The Last Jedi. And I don't want to overgeneralize, and everybody's got their own personal journey. I'm not trying to take away that, but I do feel like what Rian Johnson did, that was the most risky, the most rewarding thing to me, is the thing that people had an aversion to, and is that he kept taking your expectations and then subverting them. He knew what you thought it needed to do, and then he did something different. And so people that wanted that comfort food, and then they get there and it's something more complex than mashed potatoes and gravy, and they're like, whoa, I didn't order this. You know what I mean? So do you think that might have played into the divisive nature of that one?
I think 100%. And I've said visually, there's a lot of the original Star Wars in there. Like, even like the way they deliver their lines cracks me up. It's almost dated. Like, it's like, oh my God, there's something over here, sir. No, like they're almost screaming their lines. And it's very nostalgic in that way. And I heard people going, it's campy. I'm like, well, he played into that. But I left the movie thinking Luke was super interesting. I thought that was like, I loved where they took Luke's character. and everybody else was like mad about it. And I was like, well, yeah, I mean, I know he's not the the little whiny kid who's talking about power converters and that, but like they took his character into a different place, and it's been 30 years since you've seen this character, and he would have changed and grown. So I found that super interesting, and I knew a lot of people who were like they destroyed Luke, and I'm like, well, I mean, any person, I'm not going to be the same guy 30 years from now, you know?
Yeah,
like, it's just not going to happen.
And I think that's we kind of do impose our own experience and our own history onto these characters, and that's something that I find that nostalgia isn't like this term was coined back in the 1600s. So nostalgia is here, and then in the future people will be nostalgic about now. So obviously there's an inevitability to it. You can't do away with a feeling. And it's funny that at the beginning doctors actually classified nostalgia as a disorder because it does have this complex emotional range. It's not happy or sad. It's actually both of them. And when I saw Stranger Things, this is one of the few examples that I can think of when I just started watching it that it hit me in that sweet spot between like being melancholy and being like super happy about it. And it was really able to recapture what I remember in an idealized way that period of time was like. Do you think that this current age of digital revolution has us yearning even more, though, for a simpler time back before technology gave us everything?
I think so too. I think people think of it as a simpler time. I think that's a fallacy, though. It was not a simpler time. If anything, we're living in a simpler time now. People just don't realize it. But so I think people, because of the modern age, and you're seeing, I don't know, a lot more news and negative stuff. You even hear it on a tangent, not related to movies. You hear about like people going, "Oh, we live in a more violent society," and you're like, "No, we don't." Like crime rates have dropped significantly, but it's that nostalgia play. I think the world seems bigger now because we have more access to it. When you were just a kid down your street, it didn't seem that way. But the world was always big and complex and scary. I think we're just a little bit more exposed to it right now.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
I do think Stranger Things is a great way to do nostalgia. I actually just watched Hateful Eight. That's another way. That's an old film techniques. There's a lot of nostalgia from old like spaghetti westerns I was watching as a kid, but with still being new content. And I think Stranger Things did that. It had that Goonies vibe, that Monster Squad vibe, without just being a Goonies, E.T., whatever remake. I think that's a much smarter way to do nostalgia. Or the Air. Did you ever see the movie Air?
No.
Oh, that movie's great. It's with the guy from Walking Dead with the crossbow. I cannot think of his name right now. And then like Diamond Johnson or whatever. And it's just two actors, but it's very much that Stranger Things. It's that older film style. The music's very like late 70s, early 80s. And I got that like nostalgia watching old horror, even though it's a brand new story. I think that's a much more interesting way to do it.
Yeah, I'll have to check that out. I'm into those kind of things. There was one called Turbo Kid that came out. That's on Netflix. It's really good. And then Kung Fury is also really cool. But I would just wonder, like, if there's we look at the place that we're at right now, and I should have elaborated earlier. It's not that we're in less or a more complicated time, but like where we used to be able to actually peruse the aisles of a video store. And you've got, I don't know, let's say 500 movies that you can pick from, where now you go onto Netflix and you've literally got 5,000 items that you can pick from. And it's like, now that we have access to everything, and to your point, now that we have access to everything, it really, I'm not saying it takes the value away from what we have now. It just makes the choice that much harder. So it seems like a lot of times we retreat back to these things that make us comfortable, that we know, like Fuller fucking House or Will and Grace, or like any number of these shows that they just keep on bringing back, because it does seem like there's a real demand for it right now in our society. And do you think that that's something that will diminish over time, or do you think it's just going to kind of keep increasing?
I think it'll diminish over time, and I even see it with like kids that I work with and stuff. They're like younger than me. They really have this thing that everything old is better. And when I was growing up, it was like we were kind of more like, no, let's move on to the new thing. And I think that's kind of a counter reaction to the culture that I was part of. Like, no, we want the new movie, we want the new special effects, we want the new video game. We want the latest tech, and I'm still that guy. You know, I got a VR headset. Like I'm that guy who I want the latest. But I think a little bit younger than us, you're seeing a lot of people who they were raised in a time where they were predominantly digital, and we do have almost too many choices. Like, I mean, you and me review a ton of movies. We see a ton of movies. We see a movie we love. It's, oh, I love that movie. It's on to the next one. Who knows if I'll ever watch it again, even.
Yes.
Whereas,
yes.
Like I went on and on about Blade Runner 2049. I've yet to watch it again. I don't know when I will. I have 1,000 other movies to see. And I just feel like you don't have that connection of watching something over and over and over again. I do it with Futurama. I watch Futurama every night before I go to bed. It's like I fall asleep to Futurama almost every day. I've seen every episode 1,000 times. It's just comfort at this point. Like it literally puts me to sleep. It's that comforting. And I think it's because I've had that much exposure to it over and over and over again that show I can't look at in a realistic light anymore. Like I can't. Like I see it as such. I have so many good memories tied to it. I'm sure there was bad stuff going on while I was doing it, but I have so many good memories that I'm literally not capable of looking at that show in an honest opinion. I'm just not.
So in that same vein, Mystery Science Theater 3000 is like my little nostalgia pacifier. I love it. It definitely brings me back to the time when Sci-Fi Channel was actually SCI-FI, and it was like the early 90s, and they had like 10 shows that they played on a loop. The Incredible Hulk was one of them, and Mystery Science Theater. Bad stuff, but it definitely, I really enjoyed watching all the, the B science fiction stuff. And so, yes, that's one that it just fits you like a glove, and I do think that it becomes a part of our identity. And I think that that's kind of one of the inescapable things about nostalgia is, again, that it's going to apply to every single person at one time. People are going to be nostalgically looking back at the first Iron Man movie, for example, which is a little after my time, because there's this sweet spot of age that really dictates the things that afterwards you're going to be the most, most inclined to remember in that way. So yeah, I don't know. It is an interesting conversation. There's a lot of different avenues that we could explore. And I am just sitting here, Caleb, just stalling for time, trying to remember what the fuck point I was trying to make. Do you have anything insightful you want to share with me?
Oh, no. But like, go back to like people judging like stuff based on their expectations. I was having a conversation with my brother-in-law, and we're both big Ninja Turtle fans. He actually does my tattoos, and I have Ninja Turtle sleeves. So,
oh, nice.
So we're big fans of it, and we both love that first movie. And then the 2014 movie, the Michael Bay, Joseph Lieberman movie, which I actually have no problem with that movie. It's not a good movie, and I was trying to tell him, like, it's not a good movie, but it's no worse than the original. And he was like, yeah, it is. Shredder was dumb. I go, you realize in the original movie, his master plan was to have kids steal petty theft and have kids smoke cigarettes. That's Shredder's master plan.
That's a good point.
It was scary when we were kids, but like now it's like Shredder is not even a villain in that thing. But when you're kids, I mean, I remember watching that and being like, oh, these kids are smoking cigarettes. I was a little kid. I thought they were like bad guys. And I love that movie. I watch it every year at Christmas. It's not a Christmas movie. I watch it every year. But I'm also a little realistic about it to where I'm like, my love for that movie doesn't impede the progression of the story or the changing of something. I'm like, no, let's see where we can explore with these characters. Let's see where we can take these things. And I think I'm a little more open to it. And in fact, I feel like sometimes they've ruined people. Alien Covenant to me is a nostalgia play. We got Prometheus, which was a pretty solid film. Everybody got all nostalgic in their feelings, pressured the studio. We got Covenant, which was a disaster.
Absolutely. That's a really good point. And Blade Runner 2049 on the other end of the spectrum is an interesting story because like recaptured what I thought I remembered Blade Runner being, or like the thing that I always heard Blade Runner was. And then I didn't see Blade Runner until a little bit later. And when I saw it, I was like, huh, I wasn't exactly what I thought it was going to be. And then it turned out like Blade Runner 2049 ended up being that. So what I think well done nostalgia can, like kind of back to what we were saying earlier, it can take familiar ideas and take familiar concepts, but then filter it through a lens that's more modern. And I think that's one thing that we always need to remember, is that even if The Force Awakens is sort of a retread of A New Hope, it's still approaching familiar material from a slightly new way. And it's impossible in that situation not to bring in more of our contemporary sensibilities. So there is always an opportunity to still be creative within that medium. But more times than not, we do get the member berries and the shots that make you go, oh, I like that thing. I know that thing, you know?
Actually, that's one of the things I think was brilliant about The Force Awakens. I've said it numerous times. I think J.J. Abrams made a movie based on our memories of what Star Wars was and not what it actually was. It was a little darker, a little more serious. It was what I remembered Star Wars was, but realistically, side by side, I would say Force Awakens is actually probably better than most of the original trilogies. But, I mean, even though it's borderline remake of A New Hope at points in time,
Mm-hmm.
but I think he made a good, based on my memory of it, not based on the actual film. To me, Last Jedi felt more like tonally the actual films, like even having some of the original trilogy. I mean the prequel trilogy mixed in there too. Like it had like the actual tone, where I thought J.J. Abrams had more of a tone based on memory, which I thought was such a brilliant way of doing it. And everybody was like, it felt like Star Wars. I was like, not really. It felt like what you thought Star Wars felt like, but it actually really didn't feel like Star Wars. And I thought Force Awakens was great.
Do you think that if we'll close it down with this, do you think that if George Lucas would have used a lot more of the visual iconography from the original trilogy when he did the prequels, like he would have shot it in that traditional look and would have done it all in camera with practical, I mean, John Williams did compose it, so the music's similar, but do you think if they would have taken that more let's say homage approach to the prequels, that it would have been more successful or beloved? Or do you think that it didn't have enough time yet before people started getting sentimental about it?
I think that would have well, there's a couple of problems. I actually think so. I stand by the prequel arc, the actual story, the actual plot of the prequels is a much more fascinating story than the originals. It's about the rise and fall of a person, fall of a government. It's not the best acted, and the special effects are not good when everything's blue screen. I think that green screen. I think that would have helped a lot if they hadn't done that. They'd done a little more practical. I still think there might have been some problems with it. I feel like the perfect level of nostalgia to remake is stuff that people have nostalgia for but don't love. You look at Jumanji. Jumanji's a crazy runaway success. With the exception of my wife, I don't know any diehard Jumanji fans. Like none. Everybody remembers it.
Yeah.
They like it and then they move on. I think if you get something that's too beloved, you can have a hard time making it meet the standards. But if you get something that's too obscure, so I think you need a sweet center. Like I'm actually surprised Power Rangers didn't do bigger, because I never saw it, but I thought it was right in that sweet spot of like, oh, I remember Power Rangers, but you don't meet a lot of diehard Power Rangers fans. Like that's not a real thing. I mean, I'm sure they're out there, but
it's so crazy how many diehard Power Ranger fan friends I have. I'm with you. I didn't realize it was a thing. I saw Jason David Frank this weekend.
Fans?
I'm telling you, dude, my buddy Malcolm, he is so hardcore into Power Rangers. It would surprise you, I think.
Because I meet a lot of these diehard Ninja Turtle fans all the time, and they don't know shit. Yeah, I'm like, no, you watched the cartoon when you were a kid. You never picked up a comic. You're not a diehard fan. That's
but
cool.
Do you have a Donatello fucking sleeve
I'm like,
down
do
your
you
arm?
Have all four of them and Casey Jones and a comic book character tattooed on you that's not even in the cartoons? No. Like, you're not that diehard. You know what I mean? Like, and that's how I don't know. Maybe there are diehard Power Rangers. I've never met one. I met people who say they are, but I'm like, what's your favorite version? What's your? They can't even tell you the original show that it's cut up from. I'm like, if you don't know that, you're not a diehard fan.
Yeah, right. Yeah, for sure. So,
Yeah.
you mentioned Ninja Turtles. We mentioned Star Wars. We mentioned a couple other things. What's something that you're nostalgic for?
So in general, then this isn't a franchise, but cyberpunk in general. So I've always been a huge fan of cyberpunk, Blade Runner, even Blade Runner, which I'm not a big fan of the original that much, but all the horrible ones. I'm talking Johnny Mnemonic, all of them. I love them all. I love Strange Days, which I think is actually a really good film.
It's a good movie.
Existence. Yeah, so I love anything cyberpunk. I was super excited for Duncan Jones Mute, which I don't know if you've seen. It broke my heart a little bit, but like, but I got super nostalgic. I'm not gonna lie. It turned on and there was neon lights, and I was like, okay, I was instantly in. They had me hooked, because even though I ended up not liking the film, because I am super nostalgic for that in particular. It brings back something of my childhood, and the old monster movies, like the Universal monster movies, I'm super nostalgic for. And then Abbott and Costello, but it's not like they're going to do an Abbott and Costello remake. You can't do it, you know?
Yeah, right, for sure. Yeah, for me, I think like the 80s Jim Henson stuff, Rankin and Bass, you know, the old Hobbit animated stuff, all sorts of horror movies from the 80s, especially like slasher films. There's a couple things that I think back on that I'm like, oh man, Candyman of all things was one that like I remember the experience of watching that movie and how cool that I thought it was. But and then on Saturday nights they would do the like man, what was it? It was Elvira, Mistress of the Dark had her show, but there were several of the other ones. Then it was similar to Mystery Science Theater. They would play these really bad horror movies on Saturday nights, and they would have somebody that like announced it. So those are a couple of the things.
Bad black and white horror films like Bela Lugosi's The Ape Man. I don't know if you've ever seen that. It's like the worst film ever. I love that movie. It's bad, but like that stuff does get me super nostalgic. I grew up. My grandpa's probably the whole reason I'm really into film. I mean, he passed away when I was like 4th grade, real young, but he had that much of an influence because we would just hang out and watch kung fu films. Kung fu is another thing. Any martial arts, I'm there. I'm such a fan because I would hang out with my grandpa and I'd watch that. I'd watch Abbott and Costello and cheesy, bad horror films and like Ray Harryhausen movies, you know, the claymation, all that stuff. I love all of that. It's just
good stuff, man.
That's what I grew up on.
So what about you guys? We're going to go ahead and turn it over to the comment section. Let us know what some of the stuff that you're nostalgic about is. Let us know. Yeah. And also, what do you think about this whole topic? Is nostalgia something that is helping or hindering the entertainment industry? We'd love to hear your thoughts about that. I'm going to go ahead and link you to Caleb's content down in the description. Also, you can find it on my featured channels menu down over there on the side over there. So anyways, we appreciate you guys stopping by. Click that like button, subscribe to stay up to date with all the terrible content. On behalf of me and Caleb, be terrible.